start it. I'm
Very
starting.
Good. Okay, Kathy, great.
So, all right, we are live and exciting.
All right.
And yes, the participants are racking up now. So
good deal.
Actually, a lot of people. Some of the folks are always on time, and they stand up sitting in the little lobby, so to speak. But everyone's joining us now. So
good.
All right. So I'm going to give everybody a few minutes.
Okay.
To get into the meeting and hello out there to CSINext members. It is very, very good to see you or hear from you. Here we are getting ready for our November meeting. We've got a great speaker, and I'm going to give it a few more minutes just to let people kind of shuffle in. So we've got 14 people in so far, but we'll give it a few more minutes.
Okay.
Just to anybody out there who hasn't attended one of our sessions before, you'll be getting a questionnaire immediately afterwards. If you need your AIA credit, be sure you fill out the questionnaire and be sure you get us your AIA number so that we can make sure you get registered for that. And I'm just going to give it another minute or two, and then I will introduce our fabulous speaker, who's going to tell us all about the exciting world of construction estimating, which I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but it isn't, and he's going to tell us why it's not.
Okay.
So, all right, let's just give it a couple minutes or two more.
Sure.
So how's the weather there in Ohio, Dan?
Well, until yesterday, we had spring-like conditions. We had temperatures in the low 70s in the day and the low 50s in the evening. But then last night we had a cold front go through, and I think it got up to 54 today. So it's sunny, but it's a lot cooler. It's a lot more seasonal. But it won't be long before the cold and the rain show up. That happens every year around Thanksgiving for us. So
well, I am.
I'll take.
Yep, I have to say I'm in northern Idaho, and we do have some snow on the ground. And I think our high today is 31. So it's cold, and winter is here. It kind of makes me sound. For months I kept on saying winter is coming, winter is coming. I sounded like a bad riff on Game of Thrones, but winter is here. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm going to give an introduction to our wonderful speaker, Dan Frondorf. Let me just We've got 16. All right. We're going to talk about fundamentals of construction estimating today. And our speaker is Dan Frondorf. Dan owns and operates Cincinnati-based DG Frondorf and Associates, LLC, a construction cost estimating consulting firm. He's a member of CERT, AACE, and ASPE, and has 26 years of service as a construction estimator. He's presented several seminars on estimating practices and ethical bidding topics to trade associations and at various industry events. He's a past instructor of construction estimating at University of Cincinnati and has guest lectured there and at Cincinnati State Technical and Community College. He's also written several articles about estimative relating topics in Estimating Today and Design Cost Data magazines. So it is my very great pleasure to, actually before I introduce you, reminder to all of our participants to stick around, answer the survey afterwards so that we make sure you get your information for your construction credit. And just in case you all have to drop off early, our upcoming meeting in December is going to be Job Site Control, the key to project schedules, safety, and success with Heath Warner. And so that should be another really great one. And with all of that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan. Dan, take it away.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Catherine. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, the thing from which I make my living. I am a construction estimator. I am an estimator in independent practice. I work for a lot of different very variable types of clients. Our clients include architecture and engineering firms. We work for large and small contractors. We've got about a dozen small subcontractors around the greater Cincinnati area that we work for. We do mostly our clientele are other estimating firms in support of construction management firms and CM firms. So we help people figure out what things are going to cost before they get built, and then they decide not to build them. So
just a quick word to all our guests. If you have questions for Dan, feel free to pop them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I will read them out to Dan during a pause in the webinar. So sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. Just forgot to say that.
Quite good. So. You came in at the right time, because I just made a really bad estimating joke, and I have the feeling that it bombed. So you saved me there. But anyways, but no, sometimes people do decide not to build based on what we tell them. And in the pregame here, before everybody came on, we were talking about how estimators and specifiers really have a lot in common. And I like to think of us as the people who are the truth tellers. We're not designing anything, but we are the people who are picking out the products that accomplish the intent of the design, and the people who figure out what it's going to cost. So we really have a big contribution to make to the overall design and construction process. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the fundamentals of cost estimating and all the things that go into it. So I'm always happy to talk to my CSI friends. I'm a member of the Cincinnati chapter of CSI. I've given this presentation to them and to the Miami Valley chapter in Dayton. I'm going to give this same presentation to the Louisville chapter in a few weeks. So I love talking about estimating with my CSI friends. And until COVID happened, I was a pretty religious attender of our monthly CSI meetings here in Cincinnati, but we've just now restarted them live and in person. But I've elected to hold back for just now and until things get a little safer. But anyway, I'm a big believer in CSI. I spent a lot of time reading the output of people like yourselves. I highly value the CDT certification that I was able to attain 5 years ago. It was as hard to get as my CPE through ASPE, my Certified Professional Estimator, and I'm very proud that I was able to get that, because it gives me something in common with a lot of other smart people like yourselves. I like having that credential, and CSI is really, it's not just about, understanding the actual specifications. It's really about understanding the entire construction process, and the CDT really examines you well and makes sure that you understand that. So I think it's a really important credential to have, and I highly value it. So a little plug in there for that. Just a little bit about myself. I mentioned ASPE. I'm a member of ASP. I'm CPE member of ASPE. I've won a couple of national awards for them, but I'm not going to talk about that. I will talk about my membership in AACE and CERT, which are a couple of other groups I belong to. AACE is the Association for the Advancement of Cost Engineering, and CERT is the Consulting Estimators Roundtable. It's very similar to the SCIP group that some of you may be familiar with. So anyway, I'm very happy to be part of these groups. Not only are they good for business, they're good for just staying on top of your profession and keeping your toes in the water of what's going on in the wider AEC community. So very, very important part of my business and my life actually is membership in these groups. So, and lastly, if I don't say it, haven't said it, if I forget to say it later, I'll say it now. I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to you guys today. So thank you. Just a few things about what I'm hoping we can accomplish today. I want you all to have an understanding of modern construction cost estimating processes, where we go from the takeoff process, the quantifying, to establishing durations. We all know that time is money, and so the takeoffs tell us what our materials are going to cost, but they also tell us how long our durations are going to be. So every takeoff quantity will have a production rate applied to it, and from those two, you divide one by the other, you get a duration. How long is it going to take? Once you know that duration, you can start calculating things that are paid for by time, like hourly labor or equipment, things like that. So So we want to know how much and how long, and that's what we're all about. We're going to talk about all the different types of construction cost. I want you to understand the importance of analyzing risk and the impact of human nature on our profession. And we'll talk a little bit about ethical bidding practices as well, because I think it goes right along with that conversation about human nature. You'll hear me say this a number of times, and I know it's true in the specifying profession as well, but the opportunity to make a mistake is ever present. It's always there, and we have to be very diligent that not only do we add two numbers together correctly or multiply or whatever we're doing, but we have to make sure that we spell things correctly and that we speak of things correctly, because other people are making decisions about the advice that we give them, you know, for cost and for which materials to use. So we got to get the numbers right, of course, that's very important, but we got to get those words right as well. So there's a big human nature component to our businesses, and it's something that we just can't ignore, because a chance to make a mistake is something we've always got to try to head off at the pass. And then lastly, I want you to have an appreciation for the value of the construction estimator and the overall AEC community. I think we perform an invaluable service, and no one's going to build anything unless they know what it's going to cost. And if you don't have enough money, you're not going to build it. So that's just one of those things. My wife and I right now are in the process of designing a house that we've been talking about building for years. And I just got the cost estimate done on it, and wow, I'm not so sure we're going to do this thing anymore. We're going to find a way, but the amount of money that's going to cost is a lot more than we thought, and a lot of that owes to the fact that lumber prices are skyrocketing right now, and that's something that we're going to have to contend with as we go forward with our own project. So that's something that I'm facing myself personally, that a lot of our clients have to face as well. So I want to talk about the definition of cost estimating, construction estimating. You're not going to find this in a textbook. This is my definition. That this is kind of the result of 26 years of putting these things together. But I want you to understand that estimating is a combination of art and science to determine what the probable cost of any project is. It takes on a lot of different forms: quotes, bids, budgets, proposals, that type of thing. And those different types of estimates are prepared for different reasons, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But it's practiced by professionals called estimators, and we have to collaborate with other professionals, including specifiers, architects, engineers, PMs, schedulers, superintendents, and skilled tradespeople. And the last one I want to emphasize, because I really think that the best estimators come out of the field into the office. And with that knowledge of knowing how things go together, knowing how this fits into that ability to visualize that, it so informs your ability to estimate the cost of it, because you can imagine it in your mind's eye. So if you've done it, it's so much easier to talk about and to put it on paper, because as estimators, we build the projects on paper, we work out the schedules, we figure out how long it's going to take. But having that personal knowledge of field experience is an invaluable tool. So don't ever ignore the advice of the tradespeople, because they're the ones who really know how long is this going to take. What difficulties am I going to face putting this rooftop unit, getting it up off the ground? How difficult is it going to be to put this pipe in the ground? Not because of maybe how deep it is, but because of what you have to contend with, other utilities, traffic, that sort of thing. So that in-field experience is invaluable to cost estimators. So I've always thought that the best estimators have come from the field. So let's talk about different types of estimates. First thing I want to talk about is kind of a really simple phenomenon to wrap your head around, and that is the level of detail of any cost estimate is really based on the level of design upon which it is based. So the more information you have, the better your cost estimate would be, the more accurate it could be. So AACE, the group I mentioned earlier, they've actually published a paper about this, and they assign different levels to estimates, levels 1 to 5. 1's got the most detail, 5's got the least. And that publication that I'm referring to is what they call their International Recommended Practice number 18R97. So It's a 30 or 40 page document that really explains in great detail how you assign what level. But the gist of it is, the greater information that you have, the better your cost estimate's going to be. We like to think about things in the architecture world, in the planning world, you know, as SD, DD, or CD, or in the design build world, CD might be GMP, if you will. So an SD level estimate might be a level 4 or 5 estimate. A CD level estimate might be a 1 or a 2. So you kind of get the picture there. So the more information you have, the better your cost estimate's going to be. ASPE publishes a book called the Standard Estimating Practice. They too assign a numerical level, but they call their level number 5. They also call that an order of magnitude. Some people call it a back of a napkin or back of an envelope type of estimate. We've all been asked a number of times in our careers to produce a number based on very sketchy information, so, or very limited information anyway. So I hope that's all something you guys can identify with. Talk a little bit about who hires us, GC, subs, you know, A&E firms, CM firms, consultants, governments, utilities, and owners. Anybody that's got an interest in knowing what something's going to cost is going to be on the lookout for a good estimator. Talk real fast about an estimating team. This is going to vary depending on the size of the organization and the purposes for which you're going for. But a really large contractor might have all of the levels, all the employment levels that you see on their roster, and they're all going to contribute to you know, producing an overall cost estimate. Or if they're a contractor, that's going to turn into a bid. So there's a lot of people that go into this that can help figure out what something's going to cost. So with all of these different people offering information and opinions, again, this actually is, there's a downside to this because that contributes to the opportunity to make a mistake. So we're always double checking ourselves, and we're always double checking other people. And that's just, that's how you keep your estimates mistake free, and you try to get as much good information forward as possible. So, so anyway, I'll just keep moving on for now, but those are some of the job titles that you might see. Let's talk about resources and processes. We'll start by talking about the purposes of some of the estimates. Some of these I mentioned earlier, you know, they've got their budgetary and purposes. Do we have enough money to do this job? And sometimes those can go all the way through CD or level 1 before a decision is made. We look at a lot of feasibility and what if type of things. And we also look at a lot of projects that are just, you know, we're estimating it purely from a financial point of view. How much money do we need to borrow, or how much money is it going to cost, that type of thing. So if we're working for a contractor, if you're a contractor and you're bidding, whether you're a sub or you're a GC, you're going to try really hard to get that number as tight as possible. Because if you're a contractor, you want to get as much money as you can for it, still make a profit without, you know, bidding it too high so you don't win the work. So there's always that critical challenge there for a contractor to get it as right as possible. And that number is going to be highly variable. If you've ever been to a bid opening and you've seen a wild swing in numbers from between low to high, there's a lot of things that could go into that. But anyway, all of this is going to require some data collection and analysis. We're going to get that information from a lot of different sources. The design team is going to provide us with plans and specs. There's a lot of reading that goes into estimating. There's a lot more to it than just simply doing takeoffs. If we're able to visit the site, that provides an invaluable contribution to the ability to visualize the job, to see it in your mind's eye. But while we're estimating it, we're also doing what we call a constructability review. We're thinking about the difficulties and the risks that we're going to encounter to build this particular job. So we're always looking for things that are going to get in the way of progress. And, you know, if something's going to be difficult or high risk, or we don't know that much about it, you're going to see the prices reflected, or the cost estimates reflect that uncertainty, or that high risk, or that level of difficulty. So, so that we're always on the lookout for constructability issues. it's important for us to understand the intent of the design teams. What are they going for here? And not only does it help us prepare the cost estimate, but later on, it's going to get picked apart and they're going to come back to us and say, what is a better way to do this? What's a better material? What's a cheaper material? That's when estimators and specifiers are really going to get together and start talking about alternative products. You know, that the popular term for that is value engineering. And sometimes that's got a bad connotation, but I generally think it's a positive type of thing. So we're not necessarily trying to cheapen the job up. We're just trying to find a way to do the same thing from a different point of view that costs less money or takes less time. VE doesn't always have to do with money. Sometimes it has to do with time. So that's something that estimators contribute to through their understanding of the intent of the design. But again, all of these activities are going to generate a lot of information, and we've got to be organized and patient and mature with how we handle that information, because again, that opportunity to make a mistake is always looking over your shoulder. So let's talk about different methods of estimating. And I'm going kind of fast here, so if you do have questions, please get them in, and I'll do my best to get them answered. And Kathy, you're going to take those questions, correct? Okay. Analytical.
Yes, I will. Sorry, I muted myself. So.
No, it's okay. I just want to make sure that you'll let me know if there's any questions that come in.
Yeah, so, if anyone has any questions, just type them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll get them to Dan. So yeah.
So I was saying I'm going kind of fast here, so but I don't want to cut off the opportunity to answer any questions. So I'm not sure what our time frame is, but I've got all the time in the world. So I want to make sure that everybody gets their questions answered. Excuse me. So let's talk about the two different methods of estimating. Again, this is something you're not going to find in a textbook. This is really just my interpretation from my own experiences over the years. There's analytical estimating and database estimating. Analytical estimating is the act of using collected data and calculated production rates and actual material prices, valid subcontractor quotes, and hard data from takeoffs that we use to arrive at a reasonable cost estimate. Database estimating is a little different. This is where we will have a quantity either from a takeoff or have that provided to us by the design team. And then we just simply apply a unit cost from a published or privately maintained database to predict what that cost might be. So it could be something as simple as maybe a square foot cost. You know, I'm going to go back to the example of my own house. Everybody was telling me to expect to pay between $100 a square foot and $150 a square foot for a new house from the ground up in Cincinnati, Ohio in 2021. So when I got my own cost estimate finished, which I had some help on from some of my peers, it came out to $152 a square foot. So that was a product of a combination of both analytical estimating and some database estimating, because I don't have my complete design for my mechanical, electrical, or plumbing yet. So we carried a square foot number that we used from a database to approximate what that total cost might be. But for some of the other items, for the lumber and the framing, the masonry work, things that we do have design completed on, we actually did a hard takeoff, and we either got vendor quotes or subcontractor quotes that really helped us inform our overall cost estimate. So we came in at $2 a foot over 150, so we were 152. So that tells me everything that I was thinking going in was probably, it was a good number. So,
Dan,
yeah.
Are there disadvantages to combining the analytical quote with a database estimate? And yes. Are there places, obviously, where you would prefer to use either kind?
Yeah, there are disadvantages whenever you use a database, because that database was not prepared for your specific job at that specific time. It's a collection of information that has been aggregated from a number of sources. So you always have to take your database, your unit cost, with a bit of a grain of salt, because they weren't derived specifically for your job. So there is that risk. if you're doing a hard budget estimate, kind of like I was doing on my house, you want your estimate to be heavy on the analytical side and lighter on the database side. And ours was probably 80-20, I would say. The upside to using the database is if you have no other source of that information, you don't have to just, pull a number out of the sky to get something. You can go to the RS means directory, or you can go to the DCD database. I don't know how many of you subscribe to DCD or their database, but wow, what a wonderful tool it is for predicting what the overall cost of a project is going to be. So I will plug DCD. I do write for them, so I've got a little bias there. I do contribute to their magazine a couple, 3 times a year, but they have a fantastic database and a really nice product that they put out every other month, where they will take about a dozen projects and not only give you a written narrative about the project along with a bunch of pretty pictures, they'll break down the cost per CSI division per square foot for that building. So if you're specifying or designing, say, a firehouse in the middle of Illinois, you can go into their database and find other public service buildings or firehouses from the Midwest area and kind of see what those costs per square foot were for that project. Now, it's not going to be exactly the same as your project, but it's a good place to start. I would say that's the thing about databases. They're good places to start, but they're not necessarily a good place to end. If you tried to bid a job off the RS means book or the DCD database, you probably wouldn't have a very accurate bid. So that's the downside to using them. But they nevertheless are still a good source of information. But it's like everything else. You have to know how to use it and know how much of it your project can tolerate. I hope that answered your question. Okay, yeah. But again, most estimates will use some of both. But nevertheless, no matter what your source of information is, we always are going to be double checked by somebody. We all have clients, we all have bosses, we all have employers, and we have to be able to explain as estimators and as specifiers to, help somebody else understand that decision that we made or the conclusion that we arrived at for that cost or for that product. So we always have somebody to explain things to. So, okay, I'm going to move on. I want to talk a little bit about the skills of an estimator. The big thing that you need to know is that estimators have to wear a lot of hats skillfully and have a broad understanding of not just construction means and methods, but also, specifications and documents. But most importantly, we've got to be able to be patient and mature with how we handle all that information, because the chance to make a mistake is always right there. So oftentimes we work under pressure, under deadlines. Sometimes if we're a contractor's estimator, we're dealing with addenda or alternates or allowances, those 3 things that start with A that can, add some consternation to the soup when we're making it as an estimator. But we just have to do something with all this information that is organized and we've got to be patient and mature. We can't go off the deep end because if we do, we're surely going to make a mistake that's going to affect our output. So most estimators begin their careers by doing quantity takeoffs, and that's a big part of our business today. And that is simply measuring quantities of various items directly off the blueprints. And yes, I said blueprints. That tells you how old I am. So we all know that they're not blue anymore. So they're all usually black line prints, and or most of us probably aren't even using paper anymore. So this would be the point in time. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a question about what's your favorite takeoff software program?
Okay, good question. And I will tell you what we use. We use 2 products primarily, and we use a third one somewhat for takeoff, but mostly for document modification. Our takeoff tools that we use in this office are a online 1 or 2 dimensional takeoff tool called Stack, S-T-A-C-K. And it's a great online tool that allows us to measure 1 or 2 dimensional quantities. We cannot measure earthwork or anything 3-dimensional with it. We can measure 3-dimensional things if we know the thickness of a sidewalk or a slab or a building pad or something like that. But it's just not a good earthwork tool. But for earthwork, we use something called Maxwell Pro Contractor. We've been using it since 2001 when it was made by a company called Quest, and then Quest sold to Maxwell, and Maxwell recently just sold to Viewpoint, and Viewpoint has been sold to Trimble. So we've stuck with that takeoff tool for a long time because it works, it's accurate, and it produces a lot of really nice color-coded 3D images for cut and fill. And we are primarily a civil estimating firm. So we use those 2 software tools primarily. The other software to which I was referring is Bluebeam. It's something that you all have and use, I'm sure. We use it for takeoffs from time to time. It is good for doing cross-sectional takeoffs of earthwork by cross sections because it does allow you to set different horizontal and vertical scales. But we mostly use Bluebeam for extracting documents and producing PDFs of our output. So it's a really versatile tool. I really like it. All 3 of us in the office have it, and it's something that we use every single day. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, I want to jump back to quantity takeoffs for a second because they really are the basis or the starting point of any cost estimate. Takeoff work is not particularly difficult. You do have to have the ability to read and interpret plans, but you also have to be able to measure from them. So the better your plan reviewing skills are and your plan reading skills are, the better you're going to be at takeoffs. This very presentation that I give originated as a 1-hour blueprint reading class about 15 years ago. And I've turned it into this estimating fundamentals presentation over time. So it used to be a lot heavier on the plan reading side of things, but I've kind of gotten away from that as the audience has evolved. Most of our audiences now, or I guess my audiences are architects and engineers and people from other trade associations. So the plan reading ability of most of our audience members is pretty high. So I kind of really cut back on that. But you know, reading and interpreting them is one thing, and measuring is another thing. So you got to have the ability to do that. As far as the math goes, you know, when I was in the 8th grade and I was saying, oh, wow, I don't need to learn this. Or when am I ever going to use algebra? When am I ever going to use geometry? Well, I use them every single day in my life now, and I make my living with the basics of the math that we learned really before you get to high school. There's some geometry and a little bit of algebra, but most of it is the 4 basic operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. But again, we deal with a lot of numbers. So the math can be difficult just from just a sheer volume of numbers that you have to deal with. And a lot of times your takeoff items that you're measuring are going to give you quantities for multiple things. And that's where that opportunity to make a mistake really rears its head. Because if you're taking off, let's say some drywall, you're also actually taking off the square footage of the area that's going to be painted. Or if you're taking off a length of curb to pour, you know, you got to double that to get your formwork length. So there's all these little things that you have to think about when you're doing a takeoff. And a lot of times your measurements are going to be applied to multiple things. So that creates the chance to make a mistake. So again, we got to be patient and organized with how we do our takeoffs, how we take our notes. It can be time consuming and tedious. And those 2 things right there and the human nature element, again, make it easy to make a mistake. My big mistake that I make isn't with writing things down. It's with my fat fingers. I've got fat fingers. So a lot of times my 4s turn into 7s. It sounds kind of funny, but that's my most common error that I always make. So when I'm done with a cost estimate and I'm proofreading it, I'm going through, and every time I see a 4 or 7, I kind of stop a little bit and make sure, is that the right number? Is it 74? Is it 47? That type of thing. So anyway, the way you combat that is develop some sort of standardized method that you use over and over and over again for writing down your measurements and keeping it all organized. With the advent of on-screen takeoffs, really the computer does it for you. So especially with Stack, they have a real good notepad output that they generate, and it makes it really easy to keep track of what you're measuring. Plus, it color codes it as you take things off. So if it's not colored in, you know it's not been measured. It wasn't that long ago when we were all using paper for everything, and you know, some people were in the habit of marking things up and then doing the takeoff, or marking them up as they did the takeoff. But it was really simple to make a mistake, because if your phone rang or you got up to, you know, open the window or go to the bathroom, you come back, and if enough time has elapsed, you're not sure where you started. So you could make a mistake of measuring something twice, or worse, not measuring it at all. So that's where you have to be patient and mature with your note taking and the handling of all the numbers. I talked a little bit about visualization earlier. I'm not going to go into it too much because I feel like I've explained it already. It's just that ability to imagine the project in your mind's eye. That's kind of the art part of estimating. It's not all of the art part, but it's a big chunk of it. So if you can kind of visualize what it is you're estimating being built in the field, that just helps you as an estimator capture it all on paper. And it's kind of a intangible thing that you can't really quantify, or certainly it's not the type of thing you can hold in your hand, but it's just more of a confidence building thing that you're doing it the right way. So visualization is an important tool. We have to understand means and methods, not just of the trade that we know a lot about, but about other trades as well, and hopefully from on-site experience. We've got to understand limitations of labor, weather, site conditions. These things impact productivity and scheduling. We've got to understand that labor isn't just how much an hour somebody makes. There's a lot more that goes into it. There's, you know, payroll burdens and things like that. Equipment, materials, supplies, all of these different things have things that impact their cost. And they're going to be variable from one job to another. So we've got to keep good records. You know, I'm one of those guys that I don't really throw a lot of quotes away. Back in the day, I printed everything, and I had a nice binder full of quotes for all kinds of things: ready mix concrete, pipe, various sizes and types of pipe, you know, different mostly civil related things. But now, you know, we do that on the computer, and it's a lot easier to store stuff electronically. So I, of course, am obligated to take a few minutes to talk about spec reading and how important that is. I'm not going to talk a lot about, you know, the master format, because you all know what that is, but it's a great way to keep track of items, keep track of your costs by division, and a lot of bid forms are put together this way. Owners even recognize the importance of the CSI master format process and method of organizing work into you know, into those different groups. So,
Dan?
Yes.
A quick question. Are you using master format to organize your estimates, or are you using something like uniformat, which is talking more about systems and assemblies?
Yeah.
Because master format gets a little granular sometimes.
Yeah, I have a number of clients that do like to see things in a uniformat. So, and that's something that we can do. They'll break the different divisions into overall functions, like vertical transportation is going to be stairways and elevators. A building substructure is going to be its footer and foundation, things like that. They'll break the masonry work into interior and exterior. So yeah, there is a big utilization of uniformat in our profession that we see. For me, site work kind of lends itself to going back to the master format, divisions 31, 32, and 33. So I don't get into the uniformat too much, but a lot of our output is put into uniformat by our clients. So it is important to understand the difference between the two. And yes, we do see both quite a bit. That's a good question. I do want to make a note of how important it is for estimators to read the front end documents, division 0 and 1. That's where you find information that's applicable to all the different trades. The procurement rules, the insurance rules, scheduling, wage rates, things like that, other logistical components. Those are so important, especially if you are a general contractor. But even if you're not, understanding them as a sub is important as well, because a lot of those general items are going to trickle down to the subcontractor level as well, especially the owner's payment terms. If you're a sub and you're bidding a job, I'm going to go right up to Division 0 and see what the owner's payment terms are, because that's probably how the GC is going to pay me as a sub. If I have to, wait for the GC to get paid, if there's a pay when paid provision, I know I'm probably waiting at least 60 days for my first payment if I'm a subcontractor. And depending on the size of the project, that's probably going to impact my price. So those are things that contractors think about and take into consideration. So, but there's usually information up there about scheduling and milestone dates and things like that that are important for everybody to understand as well. So you gotta understand all of that stuff as an estimator. There's a lot of responsibility as an estimator. I'm going to talk about being organized and patient again. The thing about estimating is that there is no license from the government to have the job title of estimator like there is for architect or engineer or accountant or lawyer. So, one of the other estimating jokes is anybody with a pen and a legal pad and 10 fingers and toes can be an estimator, because really basically what are we doing? We're counting, right? Yeah, it is. There's a lot more to it than that. But my point in telling you all this is there's no standardized process. Estimators kind of have their own ways of doing things. But whatever that way is, it's got to be consistent and organized so that you're doing the same things the same way all the time. That really cuts down on that chance to let an error squeeze through. So, so you have to be organized, patient, and consistent with your processes. Some estimators use a file or a notebook where they keep everything organized that way. I'm a bit of a list maker myself, so I like to make lists of all the things that I know I need to do. This is especially important if you're an estimator for a contractor. You've got a lot of things that you not only have to turn in the bid form, but wow, a GC's got to provide affidavits for a number of different things, financial disclosures, all kinds of paperwork. If a project has inclusion goals for DBE and MBE subcontractors, you've got to either show that evidence that you've made the good faith effort, or you have to show that, yes, I am using these subs and they meet this criteria. So there's a lot of paperwork that goes into it if you're a general contractor these days. Talk a little bit about good writing skills. It's so important. The thing that we write more than anything else is probably emails to people, asking them questions or providing them information. We write a lot of RFIs to the design team, trying to get inside their heads so that we can understand what they're going for, so we can cost it out the right way. So sometimes your choice of words or even your punctuation makes all the difference. So, all the different things that we have to write, we've got to write well. We've got to be concise and precise, and we've just got to be competent in the written word, because we want people to understand us so that we get good information back, so that we can use that to create a good cost estimate. So writing is very important. I'm sure a number of you have gotten emails from colleagues or family members or friends before where there's just a long rambling sentence with limited punctuation, and you're not really sure where the sentence ends and the next one begins. And you got to read it 3 or 4 times to understand their meaning. That's not helpful. That doesn't help anybody at all. So I think on top of everything else, estimators have got to have some good writing skills. Writing well is really important. So I hope you all agree with me about that. Talk a little bit about a modern estimator's computer skills. You certainly use all the hardware and software that are necessary in today's world. but we've got to have that ability to create and edit PDF files. I mentioned Bluebeam before. It's a great tool. Acrobat's another one that a lot of people use. The ability to type is important because right, it's sort of along and hand in hand with that ability to write well. We've got to be able to upload and attach and download documents, save files, and that helps you be organized with everything that you do. Got to be able to open and use different types of files. And you know, this is a Microsoft function, but I create folders after folders after folders to help me keep my projects organized. And every client of mine's got a folder. Every project for that client's got a folder. Every little thing that goes into that's probably got a folder. I might have a bunch of material quotes, or I might have my production rate calculations or whatever. So I try to keep that as organized as possible. So it's just important for us to be organized, to do our work the right way. Kathy asked earlier about, you know, modern, you know, software tools and techniques. I talked a little bit about what we use in addition to on-screen takeoff software. You know, there's software that'll actually do your cost estimating for you. It'll write your proposals for you. There's a lot of software out there now that will acquire information from the job site if you're a contractor, and it'll save it for payroll, you know, for change orders, for all sorts of different things. You see a lot of people walking around with tablets and pads that are, you know, the superintendents are filling out their reports, you know, on their phones anymore these days, and that gets uploaded and saved back at the office. So, of course, the basic ones are the internet and Google Earth, a wonderful tool, especially for civil guys like me. I'm one of those people that used to pay for Google Earth back when they made you pay for it. But you got to have a good PDF creating and viewing software. And I like and recommend Bluebeam. It's a great tool. So I'll throw a question out to the crowd if you would convey this for me, or maybe solicit some answers. But what does everybody think the world's most popular cost estimating software is? And if maybe a handful of you, if you would, just write your answer back, Kathy, and read them off for me if you would.
Yeah, just throw them into the chat, everybody. I got one person that says Timberline. I got another person that says Means. I got someone else that says Excel. I got 2RF Means, on-screen takeoff, Excel.
Okay, those are all the answers I was expecting, but the correct answer is actually Excel. You know, that's what I use for cost estimating, and I don't use Timberline or any other software. And the reason is because my client base is so variable that Excel really provides that flexibility that I need to generate different things for different clients. So I really like Excel. I use it a lot. I have thousands of Excel cost estimates that I've developed over the years that I don't throw them away. I don't delete them because at some point in time, I'm going to need something just like that again, and I've already got it. So, so yeah, Excel is the big one, but Timberline is probably another one. That's probably the, you know, Excel isn't just a cost estimating software, but Timberline is, and that's probably the one that most the people know more than anything else. There are a lot of software tools that will combine takeoff and access to a database like Means that will allow you to, you know, develop a cost estimate as you go along. And there's a lot of consultants in our CERT group who have developed their own proprietary databases that, you know, they've got built into their Excel and their Excel spreadsheets that they've tied to their software takeoff that allows them to, you know, use their own database as opposed to one that's available out there on the public market like Means. So I don't really have a database myself so much. I kind of look at every job as if it's a brand new job, and there are a lot of things that I repeat and replicate from other projects, but I can't really say.
Sounds like you are a database, Dan.
Yeah, I don't rely on just any one thing. So again, I generate a lot of information. I'm in my 23rd year of self-employment, which is a long time to be self-employed. So hopefully it's served me well. And anyway, so we'll keep going. So I don't want to talk a lot about dimensions because you guys probably have a handle on these, but this is a fundamentals class. So it is important to understand the difference between, you know, one-dimensional, two-dimensional, and three-dimensional quantities. Going from one to the other is a source of making a mistake. So if you are in cubic feet and you forget to divide by 27, you've got a problem on your hands. If you're in square feet and you're trying to get a square yards and you divide by 3 instead of 9, you've got a problem on your hands. So the other thing to realize when you're doing takeoffs is not all the dimensions that you need are on the same plan sheet. A lot of times you're flipping back and forth between plans and detail pages to get that second or third dimension that you need. So again, these are all opportunities to make a mistake. So we gotta be careful with how we record that information. So anyway, overall skills, you know, we gotta have something in common with all the following professions: architect, accountant, engineer. You can read them all, but we've got to have some of those skill sets. To me, this is what makes estimating such an interesting and provocative career, is that I don't have to be an architect or an engineer, but I have to know what they're doing. And nobody works with the output of architects and engineers more than estimators. Every project that you drive past that you see that it's been built probably had at least, you know, 50 or 60 estimators looking at it from different points of view for all the different trades that went into it. So I've got to understand a little bit about the law. I've got to understand about running the job. I got to think like a field person, like a laborer or a superintendent. I've got to understand what's inside their head. So all of these things, just to me, it just make it such an interesting career. I've got to be pretty good at a lot of this stuff, but I don't have to be, you know, an expert at all of it. And to me, that diversity of talent is kind of wrapped up into one job title. And to me, that's really interesting. That's why I love it so much. I still like coming to work every day. It's fun, and I can't believe people pay me to do this. So, but anyway, let's jump into labor, equipment, overhead, and profit. I'm going to go through this kind of quick because we're actually getting a little bit late in the hour, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. But I do want to talk about this work breakdown structure thing that you may have heard tossed about. That's a phrase or a terminology that you may run across. And when you think about that, I want you to think about it like this. Just think sequentially. Think about what has to happen before whatever it is you're thinking about can happen. Like if you are a painting subcontractor, what has to happen before you can paint those walls? Well, the walls have to be built. So somebody's got to come in and do the framing, then hang and tape the drywall and finish it. And then it can be painted. And then after it's painted, what's going to happen after that, you know? And so you want to think about things in a sequential manner. So that's how schedules are developed. And so we're not really talking about scheduling, you know, in depth today, but there's a lot of logic and sequence that you have to think about as an estimator. You always want to be aware of what's going to happen before your trade shows up on a job and what happens after. Who's depending on you and who are you dependent upon? So those are questions that we ask ourselves. So we'll talk a little bit about overhead and profit and things like that. I'm not going to talk too much about hour, but you know, on top of your hourly rate, you've got the payroll burdens. All those things add up to a total hourly rate that we have to factor into the cost of labor. So your $21 an hour laborer, he might actually, or she might actually be costing you $45 an hour by the time it's all said and done. And those are the numbers that you want to carry in your cost estimate. You need to understand the difference between market rates and prevailing wage rates. Most federally funded projects are subject to a prevailing wage rate, which are just the prevailing union wages for a project. A lot of states have gotten away from prevailing for state-funded projects. So they would just simply fall back to what's called market rates, and that is you pay people for what they're worth. But you need to know what you're dealing with on a project as an estimator to get those wage rates correct. You want to think about nights and overtime and weekend work. Those things all increase the cost. I do want you to think about labor and equipment going hand in hand because they both are paid for by the hour. And collectively, we call those a crew composition. What labor and what equipment do we need to do the job? And those two things are paid for by the hour, you know, or by the week or by the day. by some unit of time. So we want to know what that duration is going to be. This is where our quantity takeoffs come back into play. And we want to take our quantity and divide them by what a production rate is for that. How much can we do in an hour? Or how much can we do in a day? That's the art part of estimating. You're never going to have an architect or an engineer tell you your crew must do 100 square feet of drywall a day or 300 linear feet of curb an hour or whatever. That's going to be up to the estimator or the contractor. But that's how you go from quantity to duration, is that production rate. And it reinforces that concept that time and money, or time is money. It's really a true statement. So just a few comments about production rate. This is the speed with which a project can be completed. And there are a number of factors that really go into that. And as the estimator does their work, they're thinking about the characterization of the job. You know, what is it about this job that's going to impact how fast it's going to go? Is it remote? Is it in far northern Idaho? Or is it in a densely populated urban area like Manhattan? You know, production rates are going to be variable between those two job sites for a lot of different reasons. It's how close are we to material? What's the availability of labor, that type of thing. So there's a lot of things that really impact production rates. And that's something that you as the estimator need to come up with on a particular project of the work. And in my world, in the civil world, the exercise that I like to illustrate is putting pipe in the ground. You know, if we have to do a sanitary sewer that's 20 feet deep, or we have to do one that's only 5 feet deep, which one's going to have a faster production? Well, the one that's shallower, of course, because we're going to spend a lot more time putting pipe in the ground than we are going to be digging. And the deeper it is, the more digging and backfill we're going to have, so the longer it's going to take. So those are some things. It's a real common way to think about, you know, production rates and how they can be variable. It's important for us to go back to our historical cost data and figure out, you know, what did it take to do this 10 years ago, or what did it take to do on this job 2 years ago? So even if we bid a job and we didn't get it, we still calculated production rates and things like that. So that information that we develop, it could be applicable on another project. So therefore you have to, you know, you're always thinking about, have I done this before? Have I looked at this before? Have I looked at the same scenario or a similar one? So anyway, that's how we go from quantity takeoff to how long is it going to take to duration. So we also want to think about other things like safety, schedule, and cost as we put our cost estimates together, because we have to work safely, we have to work on time, and we always have to be aware of cost. It's just something that we're not going to get away from. I'll talk a little bit about equipment cost, and you're going to have to forgive me while I sneeze for a second. Excuse me. Pardon me. Sorry about that. That's one of the downfalls of these remote presentations. Anyway, equipment costs, we're going to have the cost to own the equipment, but also the cost to operate it, fuel, oil, grease, things like that, moving it around, taking care of it. These are especially applicable in the civil world that I live in. And there are different things about the projects that tell us what type of equipment we're going to need. So the character of the work is really going to talk to us and tell us, you know, what equipment do we have to select. And if I'm doing that 20-foot deep sewer, I'm not going to do that with a Bobcat with a backhoe attachment. I'm going to have a big Caterpillar 336 size machine that will dig 20 feet deep. So that, you know, the type of work is going to tell us. And with respect to soil conditions, I need something with enough oomph behind it to dig through rock or dig through hard soil. So that matters too. So really the character of the work is going to tell us what kind of equipment we need. And then we have to ask ourselves, do we own that equipment or do I need to rent it? And that's a big question. Typically it's less expensive to rent from yourself if you own it. That way you're creating equity for that piece of equipment. And when you have to get rid of it someday, you've got some value built up because you've been paying yourself for it the whole time. If you rent it from a Sunbelt or another equipment rental agency, you're paying all that to them and letting them build up equity in that equipment. So generally it's cheaper to rent from yourself and own that piece of equipment, but that's not always something you have the luxury of. So I want to talk a little bit about incidental cost, and I'm going fast here, so forgive me, but a lot of people incorrectly call these overhead. If you have to use that word, you should use the word project specific in front of it. But these are things that they're not labor and they're not equipment and they're not material, but they still add cost to your project because they're necessary to build it. So they're not usually called out or identified in a set of construction documents, but they're there, you know, all the same. So some people like to think of it as the cost of doing business. I like to think of it as a cost that is necessary but doesn't remain as part of the job. So the example that I'll use, so let's say you're driving down the road and you work for a bridge contractor and you drive under a bridge that you built. You can still see the steel beams that you installed and the concrete pillars that you poured. But what you can't see is the cost of the delivery charges that the steel fabricator charged you to deliver it from the factory to the job site. That delivery charge is an example of an incidental cost. You'll never know that it was there because you can't see it anymore, but it's there nevertheless. So I have the next two slides are just some samples of things that could be considered incidental costs for a sub and then for a GC. The one that everybody thinks of are portable toilets under the temporary facility category, a very necessary and meaningful cost on every project. And you can't really build the job without them, because you could, but it would be smelly and messy, I suppose. So I've just got on this slide and the next one, I've got some things that are examples of you know, incidental cost or project specific overhead. Any questions about those things? This usually generates a few questions.
I haven't seen any questions, but are you willing to make your slides available to our
absolutely.
attendees?
Yeah, and
Excellent.
at the very last slide, I'm going to put my digits up here. So if you have any questions or you want to see a copy of this slideshow, or if you want to see some samples of my software output or some of my cost estimating Excel files, all you got to do is call and ask. So I've built my business on asking nicely for things and having people smile upon me and granting my requests. So I'm so grateful to that, especially material suppliers and other cities where I'm not from, who don't know me very well, giving me material prices to help me do my job. So I'm all about sharing information. So I'll linger on that last slide for a minute or two. And if you want to jot down my email address, that's fine. Shoot me an email. I don't mind phone calls, but what I really have come to appreciate, especially during COVID times, is send me a text saying, hey, Dan, it's Susan from, I was on your call and I have a question. Can I call you? And if I have time, I'll write back and say, sure, but I might be in the middle of something and I don't want you to think that I ignored you. So I have really learned to appreciate getting that preemptive text. And I will do the same for you if I want to get in touch with you. So I want to talk a little bit about safety. Safety is certainly an important topic for estimators because lives are at stake. And these are the costs that we have to bear to have a safe job are usually considered indirect or incidental costs, like we just talked about, but they do add cost to a project, and they're important nevertheless. They just are. Scheduling is important because we are all about figuring out what a duration is. Time is such a huge component of cost. You know, not just when it's going to be built or how long it's going to take, but you know, who's ahead of you on the schedule, who's after you, that type of thing. So these things always impact cost. So time and schedule are big concerns for estimators, and so is safety. We talk about them together because they're codependent. They each needs the other to successfully exist. And I hope you'll think about this concept. It's real simple. Projects that are aggressively scheduled have higher odds of being unsafe because of the speed of the project. There's simply less time to be safe. If you've got 3 shifts going instead of just one, you know, you're going fast and something's going to get missed. Longer projects tend to be safer because there's simply more time to be safe. I don't have any data to back that up, but that's just, again, from my years of experience and things that I've seen. So I do want you to think about some of these costs. These are some different safety components that definitely add cost to a project. So these are all things that we want to think about. A lot of them are OSHA mandated. And as an estimator, we better have the cost of these things in our cost estimates. Otherwise, it's incomplete. So some things that are schedule related that impact our cost estimate: start and end dates, durations, how many times do I have to show up? The contractors call that move-ins or mobilizations. The working hours, am I working regular shifts or do I have to work weekends, that type of thing. You know, where am I within the schedule? Long lead times for material and equipment. This is where specifiers have a lot to say about, you know, what our costs are going to cost, or what they're really going to be, you know, because sometimes, especially for mechanical or electrical equipment, some of that stuff has a long time to get it out of the factory to your job site. And then lastly, proper crew sizes. This directly relates to safety. You know, if you have a project that usually takes 8 people and you decide to only bid it with 5 people because you're trying to trim up your cost, all you're doing is asking for trouble. You should always bid the right crew size, because otherwise, you know, somebody could possibly get hurt. And that's a real life thing. And I've got some experience, direct experience with that in my career, where not having enough people in the job has made a difference. So let's talk about profit strategies and considerations. These are some things that contractors think about when they're deciding how much profit to put on a job. They ask themselves a series of questions. You know, is the work needed? You know, why is it needed? To keep crews busy? Do I have to pay for some home office overhead? Sometimes you want to bid a job just to keep somebody happy. You know, you might not be trying to get the job, but you want that owner to know that you value the opportunity to bid. So you might bid something that you don't want to do or can't do, just to keep that customer happy, because you want to be invited to the next one. Sometimes contractors are spiteful and they might bid a project just to keep somebody thinking that I really need the work when I don't. I used to work for a contractor that played that game all the time, and I thought it was silly, but he also taught me that it was important to turn in a legitimately prepared number. You can't just toss a fat number at a job, because that's got backfire potential. How much to include for profit is a highly variable answer. It depends on how much risk is involved, how much competition there is, and some of the other things. I do want to talk about what the concept of a casual bid is. And this is where you're not necessarily trying to get the job, that you just want to bid it for other reasons, but you can't just throw a fat number at it, because again, you might end up with that job and you might not have enough money in it. You still have to look at every bid opportunity as if you're actually going to win the work. The chance for change orders and things like that come into play as well. Job site conditions, how good are the documents? You have a history with that architect?
I do hate to push you, Dan, but we are past the hour. So
I understand that. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to skip the part about risk and I'll let you read that yourself. I've got several slides on it. So I think I'm just going to end with the human nature part. So if you can just give me 2 minutes, maybe.
Sure.
I'll get it knocked out. So if you're a GC and you're dealing with subcontractors, you want to give them as much time to get their quote to you as possible. Don't wait till the last minute. That's the bottom line in all these slides. That just creates uncertainty and it drives cost up. Give that sub or supplier as much information as possible. Keep them apprised if there's any addenda. Keep in touch with them during the pre-bid period. Don't just contact them at first time and then wait till bid day to ask them again. They, like everybody else, have other things going on in their world and they may have forgotten about it. So ask the questions of your subs to make sure they understand their scope of work. Ask for scope letters that describe the work they're going to quote. And then have some sort of predetermined method of evaluating bids before bid day. They'll save you a lot of time. Make sure you provide opportunities for DBEs, MBEs, that sort of thing, SBEs. But then share bid results if you can. Offer usable information, letting them know how their pricing was. This really ties into the human nature thing, because if you're a sub or a vendor and you just quote a project after project or project, you never win the work. You know, you think at some point in time you're going to say, is it even worth it? Should I just not quote to this guy anymore? That's not fair to them because they're going to a lot of effort to prepare a quote, a legitimate quote. So let them know, even if you don't use their number, let them know that, don't give anybody else's numbers away, but you can let them know that, hey, you weren't low, but you were 4th out of 7, and the lowest number was about 15% less than yours. Let them do the math, and that kind of gives them the feedback that they want to know. So they will appreciate that, and it'll help them want to keep bidding your project. So don't engage in bid shopping or anything similar. Let your subs know you don't play that game. Don't ever divulge somebody else's numbers in an effort to get a cheaper number out of somebody else. That's called bid shopping or bid peddling, and that just leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth. So that's something ASP takes a big stand against, and I've got a whole presentation just on that topic. If you want to talk more about it, get a hold of me afterwards. And really the whole human nature thing comes back to what I've been talking about all the time, and that's minimizing that chance to make a mistake. Not only are we dealing with a lot of numbers, but we're dealing with other people as well. So, we've got to talk to these people. We have to depend on these people to be right. And if they're not, we've got to, before we confront them with that, we've got to make sure that we're right and we know that they're wrong. So you never want to hurt anybody's feelings, because that person's going to, they're going to have something that you need at some point in time. And you want to be viewed as a person that's easy to get along with. Experience and judgment, you can't be taught those things, but you develop those by years of consistent bidding practice. So you kind of get the picture. So there's my last slide. So my digits are up there. And if we have just a minute or two, I'll be love to answer a couple of questions, Gabby.
I do have one question, and this is kind of a crystal ball question. So we all understand where you are. Do you think construction costs are going to come down once COVID is more under control, or is under control, whatever under control means?
Well, there's a lot of school of thought about that. And it's pretty much been agreed to that COVID itself isn't impacting, material prices, but it's really impacting production rates and things like that. So I would expect labor costs, I wouldn't expect hourly rates to come down, but I would think that the labor component of costs would come down once some of this uncertainty about, social distancing goes away. Because there are some construction activities that just require a bunch of people to be around each other in close proximity. And if we have social distancing rules, that's going to impact our crew sizes, which could make it unsafe. But what most contractors are going to do is they're just going to go slower because of the less people. With respect to materials, I don't think COVID has as much impact there as does the current trade wars and tariffs and things like that. So, it sounds like we may have a different administration federally in the new year, and they may have a different approach to trade and tariffs and things like that. We're seeing a big spike in lumber prices because of tariffs between Canada and the United States right now. So I think, that has less to do with COVID and more to do with, trade policies. But, it seems like there's a lot of work out there. So hopefully there'll be enough there for all of us. And that's the best short answer I have for that question.
Well, Dan, I want to take the opportunity to thank you on behalf of CSINext and our attendees. This was great. I really appreciate you taking time to talk to us. And grab Dan's phone number, grab Dan's email address off the screen there. And if you don't get it and you need it, you can shoot an email through the CSINext site. I know everyone, we're past the hour, so I'm gonna, kind of rush through this. Just to remind you that December 3rd is our next presentation, which is about job site control, the key to project schedule, safety, and success. So it's, again, we're talking about those incidental costs, those things that play so heavily into job sites. Keep your eye out on the site, keep your eye out for an email, look for the survey from CSINext. And again, thank you very, very much, Dan. We had 21 attendees.
Great. Glad to be here today. Thank you for the chance.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
And take it easy. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, all. Take care.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Kathy. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. So, you know, the last time I did this for CSI Louisville, it went about 75 minutes. So this one did too. So I think going forward, I'm going to tell everybody 75 minutes. That seems like the right number. So I apologize for going over.
No problem. Thank you very much. Great presentation. I got to go do a board meeting now.
All right,
so
take
I
care.
will
I'll
talk to you
I'll
later.
Talk to you again. Bye-bye. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.